We're going to start with Colin's experience, which is really, really interesting, plus lots of great pictures about planting new woodland in East Lothian, actually. So Blegbie Farm, he's going to be talking a bit about that, what the challenges, the pros and cons have been, and just feel free to ask about his experience as much as you want to. Then Virginia is going to move into telling us a bit about grants and other ways that you can actually make this woodland creation a reality in your farm with support from Scottish Forestry. Then Matthew has very kindly agreed to talk a little bit about the farm woodland assessment, which is a really, really useful tool, but that we've noticed that not that many people know how to use. So he's going to tell us about his experience accessing it. Then we're going to move to Andrew, who's going to be talking about the Woodland Carbon Code. And again, feel free to ask as many questions as you want. This is one of his baptisms of fire, so go ahead and torture him. Then Fiona's going to talk a little bit about Future Woodlands and what that project is about and how it can help you turn your ideas of creating wood into a reality. And then we're going to be getting some questions in a Q&A towards the end. Having said that, feel free to ask questions at any point, because we'll try to address them as soon as possible and try to weave them into the conversation rather than having a lot of them towards the end. Today, we're going to be using Mentimeter for asking the questions and also to ask you some questions for yourselves. There's going to be, I'm going to be putting this code on the chat right now if you prefer to use your computer to ask any questions that we may have through it. So let me share it now. The other option is for you to go to your computer, to your phone, and just put www.mentimeter.com and the number that you're seeing right there. That should take you to a couple of questions as well. You can ask your questions as well in this one using that open Q&A little logo there. If you're in your browser, the logo is down here on your lower right side. What that allows you to do is ask questions that other people can upvote. So it becomes really easy to see what other people are asking. If you have a question, you're not sure someone else has asked it yet, or you're a bit ashamed, this is a sort of like secret way to ask your questions. And we're going to start testing it. If you could just go to either www.menti.com and input that number, or if you prefer to use your computer, I've just posted the link. And just vote whether you have created woodland on your farm, if you're planning, if you haven't, if you're thinking about it. That would be great if you could answer that question. All you have to do again is to go to www.menti.com and input the code, which is 94605354. And I can see one of you have, others haven't, others are planning to do soon. And I'm going to leave this open so that you can just answer as the event goes on. Feel free to continue afterwards if you've not found it yet, or if you want to do it. But it's good to know that we have a good balance today between people who have done it, are planning to, and haven't. We're going to get started then, if that's okay with everyone. We're going to get started with Colin, who's our star today, our farm star. Don't look like that, Colin. We all know you are. And so we're going to start with his experience. Again, please feel free to use either Menti or the chat to ask your questions. And we'll be paying attention to those at any point. Let me start by sharing this presentation where you can actually see a little bit more about the woodland, the woodland creation there. And Colin, get started anytime you want.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Colin Lowry. I'm just a farmer with very limited knowledge of trees and forestry, as you can see by the slide of one of our ancient trees on the farm. Hopefully the ones we planted recently will turn out a bit better than that. I'm very fortunate to farm in East Lothian. It's the Garden of Scotland. Unfortunately, I farm on the Rockery. but never mind, we can't have everything. But Blegbie is a family farm. It's about 260 odd hectares. It's upland, stock rearing, partly LFA. We have about a couple hundred acres of cereals and 100 suckler cows and 530 ewes. So a fairly typical sort of average size farm. We've also got about 22 hectares of mature woodlands, which are been in need of some management. But as I said before, primarily I'm a farmer, not a forester, but I have learned a lot in the last year or two about it. So we're hoping to improve those woodlands as well. Could I have the next slide, please, Anna? We farm between 750 and 1250 feet above sea level, predominantly north facing, and the upland grassland areas such as what we're looking at here was lacking shelter, especially in cold springs like the one we've have experienced and we're still experiencing this year. The higher ground's generally poorer quality, class 5-1, limited to growing grass or forage crops, although the majority has been reseeded over the years. I was thinking about planting trees for a number of years. As you can see in the background of that slide, there are quite a lot of good conifer plantations surrounding us. As I said previously, we're also needing some more shelter on the farm, and sporting cover was another consideration as well, because I do let out the shooting to a small syndicate. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I said, thinking about trees, in spring 2017, I noticed an article in the farming press about a free farm woodland assessment. I was drawn particularly by the free part, typical farmer looking for something for nothing. But I contacted Virginia and she was very helpful and assigned Gavin Marshall from Treeline Woodlands to do a report. So when Gavin came out, we had a chat about the possibilities for new plantations on the farm, where I'd like them, his ideas, and I benefited from his experience. And his report also covered the existing woodlands on the farm. So that was quite useful to get that little bit of information as well.
Very well, thank you. And you?
The report also included fairly detailed budgets. And the fact that Blegbie was in the
Grange Farm, or they want to call it.
Sorry about that. That's muted. Go ahead.
Okay, right. The fact that Blegbie was in the Central Scotland Green Network core area was a real incentive to think about planting trees. So, as I said, we had a very comprehensive farm woodland report, and I decided to apply for just over 17 hectares of mostly productive conifer ground, and that was done in September 2017. The grant application was accepted in early 2018, and we started work in autumn of 2018. And here you can start to see the first initial groundwork's been done. That was screefing area. We didn't plough it, and Gavin reckoned we could get away with screefing, and that sort of created enough tilth and a slightly higher area for the plants to grow. And as you can see later, they've come away fairly well. Could I have the next slide, please? Next one, Anna.
Did it move? Yeah.
No. Yeah, well, that's fine. That was the first £15,000 worth of expenditure. That was the some of the fencing materials. And I think it was 14.5 grand on that lorry there. So most of the fencing was carried out by contractors who did the deer fencing. We had to protect the new plantations from deer. We did the stock fencing ourselves on some of the smaller compartments. Next one, please. There's a view of East Lothian, and there's Raymond Smith, one of my fencing contractors, fencing away there. We were quite fortunate in the winter of 2018-19. It was wet, but not that bad. There wasn't much snow, so we had a really good opportunity to get the fences up. The only reservation that we did put quite robust fences up with fairly heavy stubs at 6 meters apart, and then smaller ones at every 3 meters. and a fairly heavy deer fence. So the cost of the grant didn't cover the actual costs of the fencing. I think at that time we got £6.80 a metre for deer fencing, £4.40 for stock fencing. I think deer fencing has increased the grant available, but fencing materials have also increased greatly in the last year or two. The fencing was also quite tricky and steep in some of the places to do, but we got it done. We managed to keep the deer and rabbits out and keep the trees alive. This was one of the smaller compartments we did. This was an area of gorse, which was just wasted ground. So we initially burnt it and then cleared it with this remote controlled mulcher. Next slide, please, Anna.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, you can see it's not the clearest, but it did a great job of tidying up the gorse on this area. And could I have the next one as well? Yeah, so that's some of the more productive ground. We did 15.2 hectares of productive conifer, so that's treated as a crop, obviously. It's not a huge area in the scheme of things with lots of people planting hundreds of hectares, but it's a reasonable increase in the amount of woodland we have on the farm. As I say, we put it on the poorer ground. We put it on bits that were too steep to cultivate safely, some of the wetter areas, and all the ground preparation and the planting was organised by Gavin at Treeline. Other woodland management companies are available and equally as good, but I must say I've had a good service from Treeline. The planting was carried out in January, February 2019, and again we're lucky with the weather. As if there's any snow going, we tend to get it up in the Lammermuirs here, but we're fortunate I had a good open winter with enough moisture to get the trees going. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. That was that area of gorse, and that was them planting the trees in there. They were all done in tubes and shelters. They've come away fairly well too, on the whole. And the next question, the next slide rather. Same area from a different angle. Taken just over the winter, and you can see the gorse is coming back, so we're going to have to be fairly proactive and treat that, I think, with either Grazon or Timbrel, which are the sort of the best herbicides for gorse and scrubby stuff like that. So we have obviously we did round about the trees, but the gorse itself has just come back with a vengeance, so that is one issue we're going to have to get on top of. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so that is looking at one of the areas we've planted. You can see the little trees coming away, and we have managed to maintain my stock numbers. Breeding stock are broadly similar to what we had before, despite losing about 16, 17 hectares of grassland. I used to fatten a few cattle, but now we just sell everything store. But we've broadly maintained what we have. So overall productivity of the farm hasn't reduced greatly, and through over time with the trees as a valuable timber crop, productivity will increase, especially if they increase in value as they have been doing recently. We've got some better grassland management in place. We've got slightly smaller fields and a bit easier to manage stock. There we can see some of the trees that have been planted just for 2 years. You can see them in the rows, so they're popping through. Establishment's been pretty good. We obviously had to beat up a few, and weeds and set in some of the more productive, better soil areas have been a bit of an issue. I think we had to weed a couple of times last year, but it's we're hopefully getting on top of them. The trees get bigger, the weeds will get less of a problem. The next one, please. As you can see here, that's the same bit, same compartment. We had to put these deer markers, these silver things, on the fence because there is black grouse seemingly locally. Although the only black grouse I've seen at Blegbie recently has been in a bottle, but I would love to see some black grouse back on the farm. But I think the nearest lek is 3 or 4 miles away. I did argue with the Forestry Commission that did we need to put these all around every compartment. But they said yes, so They are, if the sunlight's shining in a particular way, they are very, very bright. So hopefully any birds flying towards them will be scared off. Next one, thank you. So that's before and after from that first hill that we looked at. The trees growing away nicely. Financially, my 17 hectares cost around about £85,000 to fence, to plant, to weed, and to manage in the first year. So I took a loan out to cover that cost, and we started outlaying in August, and so it was all out until the grants came in May and early June. To be fair, the Scottish Government did pay very quickly on after the grant application went in. Gorse removal was another cost in that previous slide. The income from the grant was about 77,000. Sorry, the expended for the income from the planting and fencing was about 77,000, but we also had the Central Scotland Green Network top up, which gave us a very useful bonus. It's okay, now we can go on to the next one, Anna, thanks, that's fine.
Favorite.
Yeah, just move on to the next one, thanks. I see this as my daughter's pension fund. She doesn't quite see it the same way yet, but I'm hopefully she will appreciate it in 50 or 60 years' time. We've increased the value of the farm from a financial diversification and a biodiversity aspect. I'm really glad we've planted the trees. My carbon audit, I've done a carbon audit for the last year or two under the beef efficiency scheme. The amount of carbon that we emit has reduced from 3.4 to 2.8 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of output. So that is partly due to the trees that we planted. Would I do it again? Yeah, I probably would. In fact, I might do some more if it depends on the incentives. But the benefits have been good so far, and I'm looking forward to greater benefits from shelter and appreciating asset. And yeah, I think it's been a good thing for our farm in my situation. So thank you for listening, and we'll hand you back to Anna.
Thank you so much, Colin. That was brilliant. I was going to say there are a few questions, but as you were talking, you were answering them. So I think we can revise them towards the end. They were all around profitability mostly. So I think that it might be interesting to ask them towards the end, if that's okay with you, so that we can have a go at everyone and not just you.
Fine.
So now we're actually going to move to Virginia. Virginia Harden Scott, would you like to introduce yourself, please? And then feel free to get started, our Scottish Forestry expert. Go ahead.
Expert might be stretching it, Anna. Thank you. Could you please share my slides?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you very much, Colin, for your valuable insight into your woodland creation experience. That's very, very helpful and expertly delivered. And I'm sure Gavin will be delighted with his ringing endorsement of his fine services. So that's brilliant. So in terms of what I do, I work for Central Scotland Conservancy, Scottish Forestry, and my job is to promote and support the increase of new woodland cover within the Central Scotland Conservancy area. As part of that, I primarily aim to help landowners understand the potential opportunities associated with the integration of forestry into existing rural businesses, and also to highlight the related grant funding opportunities. Coming from a farming background as I do, I know that both agriculture and forestry have a key role to play in producing the resources required for our society, both now and into the future. And incidentally, since the days of my parents farming without any trees, we had no time for trees or knowledge or benefits of them. We have actually planted previously unproductive and problem areas on the farm, problem areas from a stock management point of view, steep hills, sides of absolutely no use whatsoever when you're herding cattle. and they've been planted with woodlands which now provide valuable shelter and shade for livestock, which help with livestock management on the farm and which provide biodiversity benefits as well. So I have sort of seen woodland creation in action myself, rather than just sat at a desk and talked to everyone about it. Anna, if I could please have the first slide, or the next slide. Thank you very much indeed. So just in terms of what I'm going to try and cover today, a brief look at the context for the Scottish Government support for forestry, look at funding for woodland creation, the forestry grant scheme, and a bit about the woodland trusts assistance that they can provide for woodland creation and hedges as well. Look at the drivers for integrating forestry within existing rural businesses, a little look at the timber markets and demand, and look at forestry as an investment, livestock and crop benefits, and the wider benefits associated with forestry and woodland creation. And thank you very much, Anna. Next slide. Okay, so just in terms of the policy context, through the Climate Change Scotland Act 2019, Scotland committed to reach net zero by 2045 with interim greenhouse gas emissions reductions of at least 54% by 2023 and 75% by 2030 and 90% by 2040, with related targets of 15,000 hectares of new woodland creation per annum currently, and that will rise to 18,000 hectares per annum by 2025. And with a Scottish Government ambition for forestry that by 2050 Scotland's woodland cover will increase from around 20 to 30% of the Scottish land area. Thank you, Anna. So the Forestry Grant Scheme, it's part of the Scottish Rural Development Programme, offers landowners and managers attractive funding opportunities to plant new woodlands. It offers a range of capital payments for planting woodland of different types and subsequent maintenance payments. Effectively, landowners in Scotland can receive grants of up to £6,210 per hectare towards the cost of new woodland planting, with monies for fencing and tree protection available in addition to this, as Colin has mentioned in his presentation. So the table in this slide illustrates the initial planting and maintenance payments. It doesn't include capital items such as fencing and tree shelters. That's included in the next slide. Next slide, please, Anna. The Forestry Grant Scheme is a competitive scheme and open to applications all year round, providing flexibility and helping farmers apparently avoid any requirements to complete an application during particularly busy periods, but I wasn't ever aware of any non-busy periods on our farm. Anyway, importantly, land planted under the Forestry Grant Scheme remains eligible for the basic payment scheme, and additional monies available for capital items are outlined on the table in this slide. That includes fencing, tree shelters, deer gates, and wool guards. We'll even give you badger gates, but we might not give you the badgers that want to use the gates. In terms of timescales, as a standard straightforward application, that might take 3 to 4 months between commencement of detailed survey and design to the production of an approved contract. As a maybe more complicated scheme involving specialist surveys might take 4 to 6 months. Applications are required to state what financial years the works will be completed in, and it's possible to apply for fencing and planting works to be completed in separate financial years, which may assist with project cash flow. I couldn't work out from Colin's presentation whether he had split the works up over years, but it is definitely an option. The capital grants, as Colin alluded to, are paid on completion of the works, and maintenance payments are paid annually thereafter over the following 5 years. Pre-application consultation with the local Scottish Forestry Woodland Officer is key to successful application, and information on the eligibility and scoring for the Forestry Grant Scheme is available on the Rural Payments website, and there's a link to that at the end of my presentation today. Just to note, I know that Colin had mentioned taking a loan out to cover the initial cost of his planting. Scottish Forestry have recently introduced a new forestry loan to help small-scale woodland projects. To be eligible for the Small Woodlands Loan, your application for woodland can be no greater than 50 hectares. Under the loan scheme, half of the upfront costs associated with planting of up to 20 hectares of that new woodland can now be paid in advance by Scottish Forestry. This new loan works alongside the existing main forestry grant scheme and the application therefore, but do note that only one claim can be submitted for the forestry grant scheme funds where a landowner is in receipt of the loan, so you can't split your works up over more than one calendar year. Guidance for the scheme can be found on the Scottish Forestry website, and we will send you out the link to that after today. Next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. There are various regional uplifts to the forestry grant scheme. Specifically relevant to the Central Scotland Conservancy area where I work is the Central Scotland Green Network contribution mentioned by Colin, and this offers a very valuable and attractive top-up to national planting rates in the CSGN area, and the map is on the slide. The contribution exists in recognition of the differential land ownership patterns in the Central Scotland area compared to the rest of Scotland, where accessing land for large areas of woodland planting is more challenging, and where perhaps due to the proximity of urban areas, ongoing woodland management and maintenance is perhaps more costly than in other areas. The contribution is paid at £2,500 per hectare in the core areas, which are the dark red areas in the middle of the map, £1,500 per hectare in the outer core area, the slightly more pink areas, and £750 per hectare in the fringe area, which is the near white areas in the map. And these payments can help generate surpluses on woodland creation schemes, depending on individual scheme costs. In the outer core area, up to 65 hectares per application will be eligible for the contribution, while in the core areas and the fringe areas, the upper limit will be 40 hectares per application. So the table in this slide shows the initial planting rates and maintenance payments available in the CSGN area. It doesn't include monies paid for other capital items, which are paid in addition. Other regional uplifts are also available throughout Scotland, for example in Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park and Cairngorms National Park, and we can easily provide you with information on that should you wish, following on from today. Next slide please, Anna. The Forestry Grant Scheme also provides funding under the Sheep and Trees Initiative. This enables applications for both woodland creation and forest infrastructure, or roads, and it's available to upland livestock farms where sheep are a major component and where the farmers will continue to farm. New woodlands under this funding must be between 10 hectares and 50 hectares of productive conifer, and please note that landowners cannot apply for sheep and trees as well as CSGN contribution because that counts as double funding. More information on the Sheep and Trees Initiative can be found on the Scottish Forestry website, and we'll send you a link out to that. We also, just to note from today, we have a fund for collaborative projects between properties which can help with overall scheme costs. Thank you, Anna. In terms of budget availability, from October 2015 to the 29th of January 2021, over £244 million worth of funding has been approved for 2,220 woodland creation cases in Scotland, covering a total of 58,000 hectares of new planting. For the year 2021 to 2022, the budget is £62.8 million for woodland creation, and there is a strong Scottish Government commitment to continuing funding for forestry beyond 2022. And we recently had an additional £160 million announced for forestry and agriculture in the recent programme for government, which includes £100 million for Scottish Forestry planting grants over the next 5 years. In terms of the future, Forestry Grant Scheme will continue up to 2024 along broadly similar lines, and the 2022 claim year can now be accessed. Thank you, Anna. And just to note, we didn't have time today, sadly, for any additional presentations, but in days gone by, when we had actual physical events that were slightly longer, we quite often had speakers from the Woodland Trust, and we have Alan Bryce in the audience today. So here's just a quick skip over what they can provide, and please do ask any questions of Alan after the presentations today. So they also provide support for woodland creation and also for hedgerows via 2 specific funding projects. Firstly, Moorwoods, and I believe this is intended to create new habitat for wildlife across the UK. It provides funding for new native woodland planting from 0.5 of a hectare to up to 3 hectares. A subsidy of 75% against total costs of plants, guards and support for a self-planted scheme, and also comes with an expert advisor who can discuss landowner needs, the best species for the job, and can help design the actual planting scheme itself. The project provides a subsidy of 60% for contractor planted schemes of 1 hectare or more. And secondly, more hedges. This is intended to create new ecological links with woodland and surrounding landscape. And landowners need to plant at least 100 metres of new hedgerow in a single run that must connect directly with at least 0.2 hectares of existing or newly planted woodland, or connect to woodland via established hedgerows within 500 metres of the new hedge. I don't believe there is an upper limit to the length of hedgerow that can be funded, but the Woodland Trust will only fund more than 200 50 metres per season in conjunction with additional woodland creation through the Morewoods project. So more hedges provides a subsidy of 70% against the total cost of the plants, guards and support. And I hope, Alan, that is factually incorrect. I shall invite you to correct me if it is not. Anna, next slide, please. So what are the drivers for the integration of forestry into existing rural businesses? In the face of current uncertainties surrounding COVID-19 and Brexit, rural businesses are facing significant pressures now and for the foreseeable future, as I'm sure many of you will know. It's sometimes thought that forestry has to be at the expense of farming output, and all too often forestry can be seen as competing for prime arable land. However, by integrating farming and forestry, there is considerable potential to ensure business sustainability and to help a wider green economic recovery. Planting the right tree in the right place for the right reason, woodland creation can create significant financial as well as environmental benefits in both the long and the short term. So agroforestry, there's some debate over the true meanings of agroforestry. It's either taken to mean fully integrated field level systems of trees and crops or livestock only, or more widely farming with trees, including integrated field level models, but also separate forestry blocks or shelter belts on farms. Generally, for today at least, maybe different tomorrow, agroforestry is considered a land management system in which trees or shrubs are grown around or among crops. Next slide, please, Anna. So what are the benefits of agroforestry? In terms of biosecurity, for example, a shelter belt or woodland block and associated fencing along a boundary provides a physical barrier between neighbouring landholdings and within landholdings, and this can significantly reduce the transfer of diseases between flocks by nose-to-nose contact. I think it's been found that trees can also potentially act as a filter for airborne diseases, although more research is required in this area. Tree planting on wetter ground can help reduce the incidence of lameness in sheep and can also result in an increase in postnatal survival rates in lambs by up to 30%. Shelter delivered by woodland creation can help with improved feed conversion rates and livestock productivity. It's been shown that sheltered areas have up to 70% estimated increase in dairy milk production. And shade benefits delivered by woodlands may become increasingly important with any climate change related increase in temperature. Increased heat stress can affect milk yield and herd fertility of dairy animals, for example. The current system of upland grassland farming demands a lambing percentage in excess of 120%, much larger hefts per shepherd, and a seriously effective utilisation of in-by pastures with a minimum of bought-in winter feed. Inevitably, labour reduction has meant that less daily movement of stock to utilise the hill pasture. The proportion of in-by ground on many hill farms is only 10 to 16%, and this leaves a huge area of hill underutilised. Here, the sheep are able to select the more digestible, nutritious plants and leave the rest, and this permits the big biomass producers, for example, the purple moorgrass, the tufted hairgrass, and the rushes, to expand year on year at the expense of the better bent fescues. Increased nutrition can be achieved through accessible quality grazing by encouraging bent fescue grasses through the removal of these larger biomass competitors, and the better, lower and more accessible areas of the hill can be managed to this end. With careful design, forest blocks with fencing funded under the Forestry Grant Scheme can help provide these grazing paddocks. And according to a report by Welsh Woodlands and Timber, areas protected by woodlands have shown a 20% increase in average annual pasture growth. Grass production in early spring is increased by warm air and or soil temperatures, allowing earlier movement of stock to uplands, meaning less feed is required and that hay or silage fields can potentially be vacated earlier. Shelter has also been shown to increase crop yields compared to unsheltered crops through reduction in water loss, particularly in dry years. Shelter belts can increase wheat yields by at least 3.5% as a result of more efficient water use. Next slide, please, Anna. There are also wider benefits associated with forestry on farms. In terms of natural pollinators and biodiversity benefits, for example, agroforestry can result in enhanced biodiversity, generating new opportunities for wildlife. More species of insects and a greater abundance of insects are found in agroforestry systems than in conventional agricultural systems, and the same applies to birds. It's been estimated that the monetary value of insect pollination in the UK is more than £510 million per annum. The trees, habitats and plants associated with shelter belts, hedges and woodlands provide important overwinter refuges, nesting sites and pollen and nectar feeding sources to help sustain pollinator populations throughout the year. In terms of pests and diseases, concern is sometimes raised that tree belts will act as a reservoir and source of crop pests, but in fact research has shown that increasing elements of crop habitat reduces the overall pest risk. As Colin has alluded to, there are also benefits in terms of sporting. Well-sited native woodlands can increase the potential of game shooting on farms and estates, particularly in the case of pheasants. Native woodlands with well-designed rides can provide shelter and valuable food sources for pheasants. Natural flood management. It's recognised that poorly planned and managed forests can exert a pressure on the water environment, while the right tree planted in the right place can protect waters. And there's a growing interest in the potential to use woodland measures to help reduce flood risk, and an increasing number of individuals, groups and organisations experimenting with woodland measures to help address local flood risk issues. And finally, but not any less importantly, diffuse pollution control benefits. There are a number of ways in which woodlands can be incorporated into farming systems to mitigate pollutants and to help safeguard water resources, while also helping to support agricultural production. Anna, next slide, please. So just an apology to Scottish Woodlands for blatantly stealing their grass, which I've done in this case. With annualised returns of over 15% during the past 5 years, forestry ranks as one of the best performing assets available in the UK over other mainstream investments. But I don't include Bitcoin in that, so I've no idea what happens with Bitcoin. These investments are underpinned by increases in timber sales and demand for carbon projects. Forestry presents a good opportunity to build a capital asset on farms. Returns are generally lower for less commercially focused schemes, but remain very attractive, and forestry land values have risen from just below £4,000 per hectare in 2010 to an average value of £15,962 per stocked hectare in 2020. The UK is the second largest net importer of forest products globally, behind only China, importing 80% of its timber requirements, and with an £8.2 billion trade deficit currently. This situation, coupled with the fact that global timber demand is set to, I think, somewhere between triple and quadruple by 2050, according to the World Bank, with extreme pressure on timber resources. In addition to this, due to reduced planting in the UK from the early 90s until 2010, there is a forecast reduction of timber availability in the UK, as shown in the graphs in this slide, which show you in the first graph the drop-off in forestry planting post-Lawson budget of 1988, which led to a quick drop-off in forestry planting rates from approximately 30,000 hectares per annum in the UK to just over 5,000 hectares per annum in 2010. That's now risen to 13,400 in 2020, but we still have a long way to go. And forecast that forward over the average softwood rotation length of 40 to 50 years, and we come to a period of significant undersupply to meet current sawmill demand capacity in the UK, and that's denoted by the yellow area in the second graph. So these factors that I've just mentioned are major drivers for timber value going forward. So theoretically, landowners planting new productive forestry now will fall into this period of undersupply and increased demand, and will consequently be in an excellent position to benefit from a ready-made market at harvest for timber, which should have a higher value. In terms of tree growth rates in the UK, they're amongst the highest in Europe. Much of upland Scotland, for example, is highly suited to fast-growing conifer species. Where suitable conditions prevail, commercial species have the potential to grow at an average of approximately 15 to 20 tonnes of timber per hectare per year, with a likely surplus of between £25 to £60 per tonne, depending on species, location and scale, and that's based on recent prices. This is on land that in the same period might only produce perhaps 1 or 2 lambs for more marginal land, and it's clear that by growing a future timber resource, landowners can produce an additional income stream, diversifying their businesses. The favourable tax regime for commercial forestry should also be considered by landowners. Income realised through the sale of timber and forestry grant scheme monies are exempt from income tax, and following 2 years ownership, commercially managed woodlands will normally attract 100% inheritance tax shelter through business property relief. There's currently no capital gains tax liability on the increase in the value of commercial tree crops, only on the value of the underlying land, and as a result, properly planned forestry can play a key role in ensuring farm succession. Thank you, Anna. just a quick note on realising the potential for your woodlands. It's sometimes easy to get hung up on maximising grant income at the outset, and this could potentially come at the expense of longer-term profitability of your woodlands. You should plan for the long term to realise potential, consider management requirements at the outset, and budget for the long term and not the short. Next slide, please, Anna. So just
go ahead.
Sorry, Anna, are you okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Super. Just at this point in this presentation, I would ordinarily hand you over to Peter Gascoigne to tell you the rest of our woodland creation story, but I believe you've already been sent the link and been advised to view the video in advance. So for those of you who have already viewed it, I'm happy to take any related questions. For those of you who have not viewed it, the link is in the slide here, and I hope that you can take the opportunity to watch it after today.
And I've just shared it as well in the chat. It's really interesting, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have later as well.
Thank you, Anna. Final, next slide, nearly there. So the Farm Woodland Assessment offer that we've loosely mentioned today already, and thank you, Anna, for introducing that subject. Farmers and land managers in central Scotland who are thinking of planting trees but don't know where to begin can get help currently from free help from Scottish Forestry. As part of ongoing work to promote the benefits of tree planting to rural businesses in the region, a limited number of free farm woodland assessments are up for grabs. They're less limited than they used to be. We've got plenty of support available this year. And the idea is to help farms in the States identify opportunities for new woodland planting to support their business. To date, we've undertaken 76 free farm woodland assessments in central Scotland, resulting in over 550 hectares of new woodland creation. There are more in the pipeline at the moment. The free, no obligation attached assessments identify how new woodland planting could help boost your business. And as Colin has alluded to, as well as detailing available grant options and other potential additional funding avenues, they explore predicted expenditure and cash flow through the Forestry Grant Scheme until the woodland is established, and they'll also advise on future management to the first returns from harvesting. To express your interest in the free farm woodland assessment by 5 p.m. on Friday the 28th of May 2021, or for further information, please contact me on the details on the screen. But please do note that this is a deadline only for this round. We'll be holding a further round in the autumn. So if you missed this deadline or know of anybody who might be interested but is not yet there, we can keep notes of interest for the next round. Colin's kindly already alluded to the fact that he was a previous Farm Woodland Assessment Offer recipient, and following on from our presentation, Matthew Imrie of Hillhead Farm, who received Farm Woodland Assessment in 2017, is going to kindly outline what he felt were the benefits of receiving a free Farm Woodland Assessment in 2017. For those not located in the CSGN area and who are therefore not eligible for the Farm Woodland Assessment Offer, then please note that free advice for woodland creation and management is also available through the Farm Advisory Service, and there's a link in this slide here which we'll send out after today. And just a final note, Scottish Forestry has developed a farm forestry demo network under a new integrating tree network project, and there's a number of farming and forestry demonstrator sites around Scotland, of which Matthew Imrie's at Hillhead Farm are one. They're running a series of regular free 1-hour online events to help you answer your practical events about tree planting. Whether it's, for example, what species, site choice, protection, design, cultivation or maintenance tasks, etc. And the next event is on the 30th of June, so please do come along and put your woodland creation questions to our host farmers, all of whom have integrated trees into their farming business. And our panel includes Matthew Imrie, who we'll come to in a minute. So just in conclusion, there are significant opportunities for integrating forestry into rural businesses to maximise business resilience and sustainability through economic opportunities, through opportunities for increasing crop yields in fields adjacent to woodland, and by crop I mean animals and vegetables. Animals, vegetables and minerals, there we go. Animal health benefits and related increase in productivity from shelter provision, biodiversity and sporting benefits, natural flood management and diffuse pollution control benefits, and all set against the background of uncertainty over future subsidies and a likely move towards the provision of public goods with related uncertainty over the viability of some farming models. And all at a time when demand for timber is increasing, the market is strong, and free assistance is available to those wishing to investigate the potential for integrating forestry into their existing woodlands. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you in particular, Anna, for sharing my slides and changing them for me.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Virginia, for that tour de force that you just had there. We're going to be sending lots of this information in the follow-up email. So don't worry if you didn't get the links or anything else. We're going to be sharing all that when a mail that should be either today or tomorrow, depending on the amount. But feel free, if you start having any questions, to continue putting them in the chat. I'm seeing some people putting them in Mentimeter as well. So we're going to address them, but I would suggest we continue with Matthew now, because it's a really nice continuation of what you were talking about. So Matthew, if I could bring you in here to talk about the farm woodland assessment now.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as Virginia's alluded to, we do have another event coming up on the 30th, which is more about the project and how it's evolving. So we'll stick to the very beginning of the process and my experience of the woodland assessment itself, which for me, I don't think my project would have taken place had it not been for the assessment. I'd been badgering my dad for years and years about the benefits of forestry, and I think farmers, and I don't mean to patronise anybody at all, but farmers, and especially the older generation, are very much stuck in their ways. They don't seem to see the benefits of doing different things, undertaking different practices, what that can bring in terms of. I know my dad, he's very short term. There's never a good time to change, because farming is a real struggle. Profit margins are getting narrower and narrower, and what we farm with lamb and with beef, especially. And it took a bit of persuading. I was badgering for years, and I undertook a forestry module at a university course. That still wasn't good enough. He needed the solid sort of proof of how it all works, the money involved, the funding available, and the outputs at the end. And my badgering wasn't producing that. So the farm woodland assessment, it popped up in the Scottish Farmer. It's actually a very similar story to what Colin spoke about earlier on. It was free, and there's the first benefit for landowners and farmers. You don't ask, you don't get, and I think the idea behind it was that we had looked at this plot of ground, about 100 acres, marginal. It was barely fenced. We were losing sheep all the time in it, and it was just becoming a bit of a nightmare to manage, or just pointless, to be honest. So we needed to look at how we maximise that asset, and the woodland assessment, when it popped up, Dad had already considered the likes wind turbines, even a solar farm, but with the wind turbines, we're underneath the flight path, and with the solar panels, we were too far from the grid to make it viable for the investors. So neither of them were going to work out, and so when we received the farm woodland assessment, which was able to display the design, the budgets, the outputs, and versus the eventual grant income as well, and that really opened not just my eyes, but my dad as well, who's the eventual decision maker, and what it displayed was really quite a healthy profit initially, even just the grants, because like Colin, we are in the central location, so we qualify for the CSGN grants. We were looking at, I don't really mind saying, we were looking at making something of about £60,000 to £70,000 just off the back of the initial grants, which, as landowners or farmers, you'll know, is an incredibly needed injection of cash at any point. There's never a good time in farming, as I keep saying, and this really projected. You've got to put the outlay in terms of the capital outputs, the fencing, and to get the ground prepared, the trees, all the rest of it. But it's a short-term sort of deficit before everything else comes in. And yeah, what we would say is that with what Virginia's explained there's never been a better time, because they've got this new grant available or loan, sorry, for the 50% of capital items up front. So yeah, the Woodland assessment will explain all that. It explains the uplift in value versus the exemption from capital gains tax. What we really need to consider, I'm just one of my dad's 6 children, so succession planning for a relatively small hill farm, it must be a headache for the person in the chair at the time. So the Woodland assessment projects even the likes of the income at year 30, year 35, when you might crop that, and the benefits that might bring to the farm when it's released. You never know the way that the timber prices are going, how much of a boost that might give the successes, if you like. It might save the place. So for marginal ground and for the benefits that the Woodland assessment actually provided, it was a no-brainer for us. I would have to say that it gives you a very good overview. There are more complications to come because it doesn't account for things like deep peat, roughly, but you would need an inspection. The current habitats that you must avoid, things like this, the amount of fencing that you can maybe upgrade versus the fencing that you'll need to just install. But it was very close to the eventual budget and the eventual profits that we made. It was almost spot on, despite the changes that we had to make. And I would echo what Virginia is saying there, is that it's important not to try and maximise the grant funding, because it's a long-term project, and to deal with what's there on the ground and work around that rather than trying to change it too much. Because I think that was the main message with the benefits that we're about to see with the carbon credits entering the market. There'll be bigger rewards in the future for well-managed and well-suited woodlands for the environment. So I think I'll stop rambling there and pass back.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Matthew. There are some questions already coming in about sort of like the practicalities of it all. But again, we're leaving them for the end. Sorry if anybody else is desperate to hear the answers. You have to continue seeing. Now you're going to be seeing Andrew's lovely face for a wee while, talking about the Carbon Woodland Code. So Andrew, if you could come in, keep the questions coming, because I think that lots of these are actually questions that can be addressed to all of you in your different sort of like positions. So I think it would be interesting. Andrew, I'm giving you the space now. It's all up to you.
Marvelous. Can you see that come through, Anna? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Anna and co, for organising this. Very flattered to be asked to present on the Carbon Code. So many of you have heard about it, but I just wanted to touch on one point initially that Matthew was just talking about there, about cash flow. And I know for all of you, it's a hugely important thing in terms of, turnover is vanity, profit is reality, and then cash flow is sanity, something like that. I can't remember the phrase. Essentially, with the Carbon Code, if you're predicted to be generating carbon units and you want to get investment in before the planting even begins, before you've even made that outlay, that's an option. That is what the Carbon Code allows. It hugely improves cash flow in an industry which inherently has a huge upfront cost, even with grants coming in at a later date, generally has a big upfront cost, and you're not generally realizing significant income for 30, 35, 40 years. So with the generation of carbon units, if you approached a company and said, look, I'm about to plant this land, are you interested in getting involved now? Yes, they will be, because then that means that they can have all the marketing and the PR of going in and planting trees themselves with their staff, etc., etc. But it allows them to give you that money up front, really helps with your cash flow scenario. But to get into the presentation. So I don't want to dwell too much on a lot of the what is the carbon code, what's its purpose and that sort of thing, but I thought it'd be useful just to touch on it, followed by the eligibility and the obligations for all of you, then a bit of a summary of the processes and costs, quite vague, but just to give you an idea. Then the interesting part about how to monetize carbon units, as I've just touched on, and then looking at source of further information where you can look to get everything else you need, because obviously I won't be able to cover everything in 10-15 minutes now. It's a big topic. So what is it? So it's the UK government government-backed standard for woodland carbon projects, and essentially it's designed to help companies to become carbon neutral, carbon negative. So carbon neutral is they sequester as much carbon as they emit, and carbon negative is you sequester, so suck into either the soil or the biomass in the trees and that sort of thing. You sequester twice as much carbon as you emit to become carbon negative. And it also helps the UK to meet their national targets on the international stage. It's based on incredibly high standards and has robust science provided by Forest Research. It's got a completely transparent registry. So if I bought a unit from one of you, everyone in the world can look on the registry and see exactly who that unit has been sold to and what they are using it for. And then it's independently validated and verified, I'll come on to that in a moment, by the Soil Association and or organic farmers and growers. And then finally, the entire premise of the Woodland Carbon Code is it allows you to generate carbon units. Now, 1 unit equates to 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent being sequestered. So the equivalent refers to methane, nitrous oxide, other global warming gases. And there are 2 types of units. You've got PIUs, pending issuance units, and WCUs, woodland carbon units. I'll come on to that in a moment. So first of all, it's administered by Scottish Forestry, so Virginia and myself and the Woodland Carbon Code team, and it's backed, as I say, by Forest Research. ICROA endorsed is a huge thing. So essentially, this is the international recognition of these units. It's the only UK government-backed carbon code other than the Peatland Carbon Code. And so when companies are buying units from this, they know that these units are going to be able to be used formally to offset against their carbon emissions in the future. So they can make legally binding claims of carbon neutrality, whereas many other schemes that are generating carbon units, they're using their own science. It's not quite as robust as ours. But obviously I'm going to say that. Next of all, you've got the Forestry Commission backing this, and then you've got the Northern Ireland Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs and NRW, but you guys don't care about that. So next of all, looking at the looking at the PIU versus the WCU. So essentially, if you had 1 hectare of mixed broadleaf woodland, you would predict that over 100 years, because obviously when you plant the trees, they've not stored that carbon, you're going to be sequestering, so storing 500 units of carbon dioxide, 500 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So what we'll do is once you'll register your scheme pre-planting, you'll get your scheme planted, and then you'll have a validation. Again, I'll come on to this in a moment, but at that point, the validator will assign you 500 pending issuance units. No woodland carbon units because you're not actually sequestering any carbon. And all that's saying is over the next 100 years, we are expecting you to be able to sequester 500 tons of carbon. Now, the reason we've introduced this unit rather than just introducing woodland carbon units and you being assigned carbon as and when you sequester it is exactly what I talked about at the start. It's about cash flow. So we want you to be able to sell this commodity. It's almost a future sale to say that this unit represents a promise to deliver this unit. And so over time, you verify your scheme. And so every year 5 and then every subsequent 10 years as a minimum over the duration of the project, which can be anywhere from 0 to 100 years in length, a proportion of your PIUs will be converted into WCUs. So at year 15, so at year 0, you will have 500 PIUs, 0 WCUs. At year 5, you've not normally sequestered much carbon by that point, but by year 15, you will have sequestered, let's say, 100 units of carbon. And so you'll now have 400 PIUs and 100 WCUs. And that process continues for the duration of the Woodland Creation Scheme. And so by the end, you won't have any PIUs left, and they'll all be WCUs. Bear in mind, you can only sell these once. So if you've generated 500 PIUs, once you've sold them, you've effectively sold those 500 WCUs. Now, I hope that makes sense, but I just wanted to really look at this as a principle because it is really important. And I'll come on to the monetization of those units later on. Now, this is just a nice image, just a ton of carbon dioxide, bigger than you thought, perhaps. Next of all, looking at the eligibility for Woodland Carbon Code schemes. So it's only for new woodland creation. So any existing woodlands that you have can't generate carbon units through the Woodland Carbon Code. There's no minimum or maximum area, but I'd recommend that if you've got any area below 3 hectares or so, you group it together with other schemes, and that brings down the costs. Again, I can't go into all of it now, but that's just to give you an idea that you can do that. Next of all, it can include natural regeneration. It's a slightly different process, but it's the exact same principle. Hedgerows aren't included yet, unfortunately, but we are looking at the science of that to make sure that we can bring this in for future developments in the code. And a very contentious one, it must be additional. Now, I won't dwell on this for too long because it's very, very complicated, but essentially you're asking, in its most basic form, you're asking the question, would the woodland have been planted regardless of whether you generated carbon units and sold them? Now, it's obviously very difficult to judge that and to test that. So we have a variety of tests that check this. We've got a legal test to say, is it restocking? Because that's not new woodland creation. You're just cutting it down and restocking it. That isn't classed as it. You are legally bound to restock. So you'd fail that test, etc., etc. But the important one is the financial test. So the financial test is basically asking the question, if you have an alternative land use, would this woodland creation scheme generate more money than the existing land use without carbon finance? So if that is the case, if you're going to be making a lot of money anyway, and the alternative land use isn't making as much, you wouldn't be able to generate carbon units. However, if your woodland creation scheme gave you a net present value lower than the existing land use, then we would allow you to bridge that gap by the generation of carbon units and the sale of those units. Very complicated in terms of the nuts and bolts of it. I won't go into it now, but that's the principle. But even if you're looking at any sort of woodland creation, get in touch with a project developer, get in touch with Virginia and myself, and we can help you through that process. Next of all, looking at the obligations, obviously a big one. So first and most importantly, in a lot of ways, is you must replant in case of catastrophe if it's a Woodland Carbon Code scheme. Now, if you're looking at a woodland creation scheme out with the Woodland Carbon Code and you had a maintenance payments of 10 years, you would have to, if there was a fire that burned everything down within that 10 years, you'd have a choice. You can either give all your grant money back or you can replant. Once you've passed that 10-year point, there's no obligation to replant. You can just say it's a real shame, but we're going to let natural regeneration take its course. A lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people would want to replant it at their own cost, but some won't. If you're under the Woodland Carbon Code, you have to for the entire duration of the scheme. So that is a significant obligation on the land and just to be aware of. Next of all, you must verify it at least every 10 years. And so this is where organic farmers and growers or the Soil Association will come out onto site and just check everything's growing as it should. You do a monitoring report, but it's quite easy and it gets easier over time, as you can imagine, because once you've got through the first 5-10 years, the trees do what they're told. Next of all, you must manage your project as you initially outlined in your carbon calculator and in your management plan. But if there are going to be changes to your management plan in terms of you said you weren't going to clear fell and then you actually think, yes, I would like to, we can accommodate that, but it will affect the number of those PIUs or WCUs you're generating. You must manage to the UK forestry standard, and you potentially may have to buy back units if you've sold too many and then the woodland doesn't perform as well as expected. Now, the code brings in buffers to prevent that happening and prevent that oversale, but it's just something to bear in mind. So a recommendation or one option might be not to sell all of your carbon units up front, sell a proportion of them, because then that allows you to get the best of both worlds. The remaining credits you're using as your own personal buffer against the trees not performing as well as you thought. And then you're also speculating on an increasing carbon price as well. Next of all, a summary of the process and costs, which is obviously very important. So the process is, as of July 1st this year, you must register your projects pre-planting. At the moment, until then, you can register projects that have been planted or started their planting within the last 2 years, so long as you have proof, like an email trail, a cash flow or something like that, that carbon finance have been an integral part of your decision to plant a woodland. Maybe you want to explore a little bit more, again, get in touch with Virginia and myself and we'll be able to help you with that. But from July 1st, before planting, so you register the project on the carbon, you just put in your carbon calculator and your map of the site. Within 3 years of that registration, you must validate your project. And so you must plant it and then validate it through the Soil Association or Organic Farmers and Growers, where they basically look through all your paperwork, make sure everything's all in order, and then they can issue you with those carbon units, pending issuance units. And then 5 years after the woodland has been created, you verify, and then that happens, as I said before, every 10 years. Looking at the costs, so I've mentioned the timing of registration. I've broken it down into direct and indirect costs. Essentially, direct costs are the costs to the market registry, that public registry I mentioned before, where you can see who's bought which units, and or to the validators, Soil Association, Organic Farmers and Growers. And so for registration, it's free, but the indirect costs are the costs that you may pay to a project developer, a forest management company that are helping you through the process. Now, they may charge nothing, they may charge 300 plus, I don't know how much they may charge, but in my experience, it's not much more than that. Validation then costs depend. The reason it ranges so much between these values is I mentioned before the grouping of schemes. If you group very effectively, you can keep the cost very low. If you go it alone, just as a single project, then it can be significantly higher. I'd always recommend trying to group projects as effectively as you can, but this is where speaking to the different project developers, speaking to ourselves, we can help you with that. And that, again, just gives a summary of all the costs, and then verification, very similar to the validation. Now, a more interesting one is the monetization of your carbon units. So how much can be made? So very roughly, prices are currently ranging between £6 per unit and £25 per unit. Now, a lot of people ask, where does this price come from? It's determined by the private sector. These companies that are looking at becoming carbon neutral, they will offer a price that they feel is reasonable or that they can afford. And so if they want to become carbon neutral, they emit 1,000 tons of carbon every year. They will buy 10,000 units for the next 10 years. And between you can agree on a price. The prices are anywhere between that at the moment, but they are going higher than that as well. And some are probably a little bit lower. The number of units you can generate can range from 100 units per hectare to 500 units per hectare. Now, the main factors affecting that are the species you choose to plant, the type of soil you're planting in, and the soil preparation technique you're using, and then also the management regime of the woodland, whether you're thinning it, clear felling it, non-intervention, that sort of thing. And so, as you can see, the total can be anywhere from £600 to £12,500 plus per hectare if you want to sell carbon units through the carbon code. Now, you can stack that with other sources of income, such as grant income, such as biodiversity credits or different types of use, timber income, that sort of thing, so long as you still pass that additionality check. Now, next, looking at the main factors affecting carbon prices as well, because obviously 1 ton of carbon isn't the same as another ton of carbon if you're investing in woodlands. So, for instance, location is hugely important. If you're right next to Edinburgh and you have a beautiful biodiverse woodland that everyone can get really easy access to, all these companies that are buying their units can jump on the train 20 minutes and they're there, that is going to be more valuable to them than one on the west coast, which is very difficult to get to, for instance. Secondly, the nature of the project. Some companies prefer mixed broadleaf schemes. Some companies prefer commercial schemes with timber income as a part of that as well, because of the circular economy side of things, but it depends on the company. The vintage of the units, I won't go into this too much, but essentially at each of those verifications every 10 years, you will be converting a proportion of those PIUs to those WCUs. those units are almost, they've got this vintage. So if you can sell, or you have to sell when you sell to a company, either a proportion of all of your units, say 30% of all of your units generated, or you can sell them very specific vintages. So we will sell you all of our units that are likely to be converted by 2030 or 2040 or that sort of thing. So you can see how for companies, I should have probably said the main difference for them between buying a PRU or a WCU is what they can say on the back of that. So if I was a company with 1,000 tons of emissions per year and I bought 1,000 pending issuance units from you, all I could say is I am working towards carbon neutrality. Whereas if I buy 1,000 woodland carbon units, I can say I am carbon neutral. And so there's a huge difference in terms of how much they value those different types of units. And so if they know that all of these 1,000 PRUs they've bought are going to be converted into WCUs by 2030, they can rest easy. They can think, great, okay, I've got that in place now. Whereas if they're buying units that are going to be converted by 2100, then they're less valuable. How flexible you are in terms of with companies that are interested in public access, with maybe changing the species composition, pre-planting, maybe changing the management regime or whatever, companies can be as involved or as not involved as you'd like, but obviously the more flexible you can be, the higher price they'll pay. In what stage a project is, pre-planting, during planting, post-planting affects the price and the associated benefits. Now with Woodlands, obviously they provide all the associated benefits Virginia, Matthew and Colin talked about earlier, but we can quantify that in the carbon code to say that this carbon unit also provides all of these other units because we've thoroughly gone through the nature of the scheme, the location, etc., etc. So this woodland carbon unit isn't just carbon, it's actually quantifiably enhancing these other benefits as well. It's going to be more valuable a unit than just a carbon unit. And then finally, some kind of frequently asked questions about carbon and monetizing carbon. So you can sell PRUs and WCUs. You can sell them at any point in any quantity that you like. And so you can sell 100 PRUs today, 200 WCUs tomorrow, to whoever you like. It's entirely up to you. It's a commodity like timber that you can choose to sell as and when you'd like, as I just said there. Talking about the vintage, I mentioned before, you sell dependent on the vintage. The companies that will buy these will be ones looking to offset their UK-based emissions. That's all. It's quite complicated internationally, but they're the only companies that can buy these units. And now there's a lot of different companies out there now looking at more varied ways of providing you with this carbon finance. So I mentioned before about paying you before the scheme has started just to help with your cash flow, or paying you a proportion of it at least. Or they can give you area payments if that was something you'd be interested in, rather than having 20 grand up front. You can say, actually, could you pay me 100 whatever pounds per year for the next 20 years, for instance? These are the sort of options people are offering because it's becoming, they're trying to work with you, basically, whatever works for you. Next of all, looking at potentially automating sales. And so that's something we're doing with the Carbon Code website, trying to make it so that a company can come, click on, I want to buy 100 units, and you don't even have to worry. You can just say, I'm willing to sell units at £15 per tonne, and it just goes through automatically. And then you can bundle or stack with other credits and grants, as I mentioned before. The Woodland Carbon Guarantee, you may have heard, only for England. I can only apologise, I didn't come up with it. Next of all, and it's not that important, just to touch on that, the Woodland Carbon Guarantee is unlikely to make a significant difference to any of these schemes. You hear a lot of people talking about the guarantee as though it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's really not. It's just another option to sell your carbon units. And then finally, looking at source of further information. So you've got the Woodland Carbon Code website, which I'd recommend having a look through, the resources on said website, and then also the different project developers that you can read through the list of project developers, get in touch with one of them, and they will be more than happy to help you through the entire process, because as I say, it is very complicated. And that's me. So I will pass back to you, Anna, and I know we've got Fiona jumping in now as well. So thank you for that, Anna.
Yeah, and this Woodland Creation Fest that we've created today, Fiona's coming in and she's going to talk really a bit about the Future Woodland Scotland project. So she'll talk about a bit about that, and then hopefully we'll still have a couple minutes to answer a few questions that have come for everyone. So go on, Fiona. The stage is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks for squeezing me in. Really interesting presentation, so I'm not going to take too long on this one. Just to give you a quick overview of the Future Woodlands Fund. So firstly, I need to see how I can share my screen with you. There we go. So
That's perfect.
Is it coming in?
Yes,
Oh,
it's perfect.
Great. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Fiona Chalmers, and I'm Programme Manager for Future Woodlands Scotland. So I'm going to just 2 slides. There's a huge amount of information today. It's absolutely brilliant, Anna. Well done for organising all of that. And I'm just going to give a very quick overview of what the Future Woodlands Fund is, and then leave Anna to send out some more information in the follow-up. So the Future Woodlands Fund is managed by Future Woodlands Scotland, which is a charity. And sitting on the charity are the organisations that were part of the Scottish Forestry Alliance. So they include Woodland Trust and Forestry and Land Scotland and BP, who were part of the pilot 20 years ago now of the Scottish Forestry Alliance. So following on from that, BP wanted to continue some investment in woodland creation in Scotland, and so they provided Future Woodlands Scotland with £2 million to put together a pilot for a woodland creation fund, and this we may include woodland restoration at some point in the future, but at the moment it is woodland creation, and it's very much a pilot to look at how we incentivise making the forestry grant scheme and the Woodland Carbon Code more accessible, just to sort of look at what sort of things are needed to be able to make it easier for landowners and land managers to apply to those schemes. And, you know, as Virginia and Andy have also highlighted, there's a huge amount of support, and we very much see ourselves as collaborating with all the other organisations, and Woodland Carbon Code team and Scottish Forestry have been fantastic in helping us get this together. So the Future Woodlands Fund is about native schemes that deliver biodiversity, and we're not sort of primarily about carbon, as Future Woodlands Scotland is about creating and conserving native woodland and also encouraging innovative thinking around that. And just for information, we do have a separate grant scheme called the Research and Innovation Grant Programme, and that's on our website. And so these schemes, the support that we're offering are for schemes between 3 hectares and 100 hectares. They can be in the process of applying to the forestry grant scheme, but they need to be not yet started. So our cut-off point for accepting applications is before submission to the Scottish Forestry Grant Scheme. The financial incentives that we offer are the agent's fee. So there's an online application process, which I'll mention in a moment, on the website, and from there we do quite a lot of the work in terms of looking at the initial assessment of the site, and then in conjunction with the applicant and the landowner, we look at appointing an agent. And we pay for that agent, and so that agent does all the necessary survey work, and they also work up the Scottish Forestry Grant Scheme application, and they work up the project design document for the Woodland Carbon Code. We also offer a bridging loan for capital finance. That's subject to availability, and we're hoping to work with Scottish Forestry on their small woodland loan fund as well. And then the third incentive is that we offer area payments of £100 a hectare for 20 years. As in return for those incentives, the carbon is returned to Future Woodland Scotland. So Future Woodland Scotland will be on the register as owners of the carbon. And as a charity, our aim is to use the income from that to invest in future schemes. So it's very much a kind of circular economy, if you like, for carbon. We realise that this is not going to suit everyone. You know, there'll be landowners and land managers that will want to, you know, manage their own carbon, sell their own carbon, as Andy has highlighted. You know, there's lots of opportunities for that. So we're very much, you know, thinking of this is a collaborative thing with the other options, but it's also, we see this as very simple and safe and secure. So that's what we're trying to promote. And we also want feedback to see, you know, that, as I mentioned before, it is a pilot. There could be more funding coming in the future if this works. If this level of incentive is not enough, we hope to get feedback, and then we'll be feeding that back into the charity, and hopefully we'll be able to go forward with other schemes in the future. So for those people that are interested in applying, there's an online application process on the website. There's an initial desk assessment that we do in conjunction with the applicant, and then we have a site visit, and we talk about, there is a contract that goes with all of the incentives, and we talk that through, and then if everything's going ahead, we'll appoint an agent in conjunction with the applicant to work up the scheme. And then the first area payments will be made after the planting scheme has been signed off. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know whether you want to leave any questions to the end, Anna, or shall I just hand back to you now?
We'll leave questions to the end. We'll just actually start with some questions now, but we're going to start with some questions for Colin, since it's been waiting for a while, and then we'll move towards it. If Virginia, any comments so far or anything that you would like to add before we go into the questions?
No current comments or questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, so thanks everyone. You've been sending lots of questions and they're quite interesting, but I'm going to start with a question that came in for Colin, and it was all about profitability. So the question was, how has planting those trees affected overall profitability in your farm?
It hasn't really affected profitability adversely at all. In fact, initially profitability was quite good because of the Central Scotland Grant Network, and the fact it was tax-free was an extra bonus. So that was quite good. As I said, I've reduced stock numbers just marginally. Stock prices have gone up, but no, I would say it's not really had a huge impact so far.
That's great, thank you. Andy, I'm going to attack you. Here's a question around, how are unit sale regulated to stop double sale?
So this is a really important question, and this is where it comes to the market registry I mentioned before. So once it has been assigned to an end user, it's essentially taken off the system. No one else can ever touch that unit of carbon. And so with that avoidance of double counting is incredibly robust and hugely important to the code. If there was ever explored and saw that people had been claiming on a variety of different schemes, which is incredibly unlikely based on the process that we have, but if they were to have done that, and both, you know, and we were to find that they've done that, both schemes would remove their carbon units and they'd be in an awful position, as you can imagine. So people in the UK market is far more robust than many of the international carbon cowboys that you may have heard of.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm not sure if this one is for Virginia or for Matthew, but I think that any of you could answer it. It's a question around how hard and how expensive is it to apply to the farm woodland assessment, if there's any cost associated with it, and how hard or easy is it from a user's perspective?
Shall I start, and then perhaps Matthew could take over? It's absolutely free, no obligation whatsoever, and it's totally free. So if you even think you want to consider woodland creation on your land, then I'd encourage you to express your interest in the offer. It's free, and it's simple. We've made it as simple as we can for the landowner. Matthew, would you concur? Is it a simple process to participate in?
Incredibly simple. You phone somebody up, they come out and see you, and then you talk about your priorities, what you want to see, and then a few weeks later you get a very robust report on how things might pan out.
And finally,
and also just
sorry,
just to say, once you've got the report, there's also half a day's free follow-up assistance from the particular agent included in the offer. And going on from that, I and my colleagues in central office very, very happy to provide any onward handholding for people who are not yet sure. That the whole premise of the farm woodland assessment is to make sure that you have all the facts and figures available to you to make an informed decision about whether woodland creation is right for you. And I'm going to hold my hand up. I've had people for whom it's not right. But I've had the vast majority of whom it is right. So, if we haven't by the end of that process answered every single question, we can still answer those questions going forward. So, yeah, Matthew, thank you very much indeed.
We're getting towards the end, so I'm going to do one last question for Colin. All the other questions that we've not answered, we're actually going to send through the mail, and I'm going to be copying as well the discussion that Andrew has been having with PJ, which sounds very interesting. So I'll focus on that. Colin, would you do it again?
Yeah, I probably would. The carbon trading thing is very interesting. If there was an opportunity to maybe not jump on the bandwagon, but to take advantage of it, then it would definitely be an incentive. I've probably used up most of my poorer ground, so I don't know if I'd be able to plant or want to plant as much. But I'm getting older, and it's a consideration. It's a long-term thing, because trees it's a once in a lifetime. The land will never revert back, I wouldn't think, to what it was before. So it's a big consideration. So, but I would possibly do something on a smaller scale to complement what we've done already.
That is brilliant. Thank you very much. I see that Nick sort of put another question. Nick will address it in the email, and probably Andrew can answer them then. But being at 12:30 on the spot, I think this is a first for me because I never shut up. It's finally, we've managed to get it on time. We'll be sending, again, as I mentioned, we'll be sending all the information around Fiona's information, Virginia's, Andrew's, Colin's. If you have any questions after the facts, which I know I tend to do, feel free to send them my way, and I'll compile them, share them with the speakers, and come back to you. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Colin. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed listening to you, and two, the pictures. I really enjoyed that. Virginia, as usual, amazing having you here. Andrew, lovely working for you for the first time, hopefully not the last. Matthew, you're on the list now forever and ever. And Fiona, great speaking to you again. And again, we'll be sharing all the information online. If you have any questions, come back. But in the meantime, have a lovely, lovely day.
Thanks,
Thank
Anna.
you so much for coming.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.